In the interest of doing this where people all had a way to contribute to this process, I want to thank all the leaders for your great cooperation that we did this based on principle and a series of principles that we all thought were important in terms of coming up with a solution. So what we've done is actually on the board to your right is a series of 5 principles. So there are 5 principles that we said the solution needs to check the boxes to make sure we're taking care of these issues. The first one being needed funding for roads and bridges. The second one, protecting schools, communities, public transit, and rail. The third one is a principle that transportation taxes should go to transportation. The fourth one being competitive prices at the pump. And then the last one being tax relief for lower income Michiganders, and how to take all those principles and apply all those things. So what I'd like to do now is actually walk you through the proposal itself and then come show you how this proposal will actually walk us through these principles in terms of reconciling that. And then I'm going to ask each of the leaders to share their thoughts on specific portions of that. So with that, you'll forgive me, I'm going to take the show on the road to the other side of the room for a moment and walk you through the proposal, and we'll be doing handouts, so you'll be able to take something with you. So if we could hand out the documents at this time.
I'll just move over here. How about that?
I'll wait a moment to get the documents out. And hopefully, for the media people, you can pick me up okay. I have a mic on because I am out in the field, so to speak. In terms of the proposal itself, here are the principles again, and again, we wanted to give you the principles so you can take those with you to see that we have checked the boxes, but there's a couple steps that take place to make this happen. First of all, it does involve a ballot proposal. So we'll be talking about making a constitutional change with the retail sales tax in the state of Michigan. The ballot proposal would have 4 key elements. It would raise the sales tax, retail sales tax, and use tax to 7% from 6%. It would eliminate the sales tax on motor fuels. So with respect to the current 6% you see on motor fuels, that would disappear. The third one is there's actually some modifications, a narrowing of the constitutional provisions for the school aid fund to essentially take out universities. It would continue to cover public community colleges, career and tech ed, and scholarships related to those areas. And finally, to make the equation work appropriately, there's an amendment to the use tax where it moves some general fund dollars to the school aid fund. So this would be the ballot proposal in front of our citizens. This would be on the May ballot of this next year. So the time frame is soon because we have to do something about our roads. And pothole season will be upon us, and it will really reinforce the point action is required. In terms of the legislative process, a number of statutory things will be passed, we would hope, today, that will essentially be tie-barred to the ballot proposal moving forward. So these would only get implemented if the ballot proposal gets approved, much like we did on personal property tax. These items are a wholesale tax on motor fuels that would raise $1.2 billion on an annual basis. Certain changes to registration fees in terms of, for future vehicles, taking out a phase down of those costs of $45 million, and then making some changes on fees for heavy trucks of $50 million. A third one is, and you should be familiar with these, those that have been tracking this, there's improvements to warranties and competitive bidding as part of the transportation package that had been previously discussed. Given we're talking about an increase on the retail sales tax, there's a need for addressing that fifth principle for the income tax for lower income people, and that's restoring the earned income tax credit. These are, again, as I said, all contingent on this. When you look at it, this is the amount of revenue raised by the change in the sales tax would be $1.3 billion. The elimination of the sales tax on motor fuels would eliminate essentially $750 million. And these are the net numbers that would result if all is approved. We would end up with transportation funding of $1.3 billion. Of that, $1.2 billion goes to roads. In terms of public transit and rail, other comprehensive transportation fund needs, there would be a $100 million increase. Our schools come out ahead. by $300 million, locals come out ahead by $100 million, and then total tax relief. In terms of, I'm going to move to the other side, not to surprise you, but to show you that this is the proposal. How did we do on the principles? Needed funding for roads and bridges. We have the $1.3 billion, so we can check that box. Protecting schools, communities, public transit, and rail. As again, schools, they essentially get $300 million, which roughly would equate to $200 per pupil. Communities have $100 million. And then public transit and rail, $112 million. So we can check that box. Transportation taxes going to transportation. Again, we're eliminating the retail sales tax from fuels. And if you look at the other provisions, they're all dedicated to transportation. We can check that box. Competitive prices at the pump. If you look at what happens and you implement this, the taxes on gasoline from state taxes would go to about 42 cents a gallon, slightly less than that. If you look at the average price of gas over the last year and take that into account for sales taxes, it was about 20 cents or so. So this would be about, compared to last year's average, it would be about a 3-cent increase, less than a nickel. So we believe we can check that box. The other thing I would mention, if you look at surrounding states, Illinois and Indiana in particular are between 38 and 40 cents. They also have toll roads, so it'd be plus tolls. Ohio is the only lower state at 28, but they have tolls, and they're looking to increase theirs. So in relationship to other states. The other thing is tax relief for lower income Michiganders. That's where the earned income tax credit becomes applicable in terms of restoring that to the 20% number. So we have $260 million in relief there. We can check that box. The other thing I would mention that I could have put in any place when you talk about the sales tax going to 7%, if you look at surrounding states, we would remain competitive in terms of our sales tax. Compared to Illinois, which is higher, Ohio and Indiana, we're all in the ballpark. 7% is not something that takes us out of the normal area for the Midwest in terms of that. So if you look at it, this is something. We started with principles, and I appreciate the leaders. Each one had a different emphasis on what principle meant the most to them. We found a solution that did this. The challenging part is it requires a ballot proposal, which is more work, but isn't it good that we ask our citizens to participate in this process in a constructive way? So with that, I'd like to come back up and start the more traditional process. I appreciate your putting up with me as I sort of go on a field trip to walk you through the details, but this is a significant proposal that I'm very excited to be supportive of. It's not done yet. There's a lot of work to be done in terms of getting 2/3 support, which we need in both houses, both chambers. But again, that's why I'm excited to be here with the leaders who are very supportive of this proposal, but I'm going to let them speak for themselves. And I do, again, want to reiterate, thank you for your partnership in this good, hard work. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Senate Majority Leader Richardville. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Governor. I'd like to also take a moment to thank the rest of the leaders for coming together in what was a very difficult process where things for the last year and a half have been put on the table. Nothing was taken off the table until we determined that it wouldn't help the overall package. And I'm very pleased that we put this together. I do want to say one thing, that whether you know this or not, it requires a 2/3 vote of the legislature in both chambers in order to put this on the ballot. So in no way is this punting anything down the field. In fact, what it is saying that we want to participate, but because the Constitution has to be changed, the people have to be involved as well. So there's a clarification there. I got that question today and I was concerned about it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what happened in 1997 when the last time the gas tax was changed. It was 19 cents per gallon. That's important to note because it was an actual amount and not a percentage. That's what caused the biggest problem to get from there until today, is that created about a $1.2 billion problem because inflation was moving much more than what the 19 cents per gallon would dictate. When you add that with the 6% sales tax at the pump, half of the money that we would raise does not go to roads. And I think the citizenry have a problem with that, and most of them don't know it. So by replacing that with a wholesale percentage on the wholesale price of gasoline, we eliminate the 6%, and therefore all the money at the pump goes to roads, and then we built in an inflationary factor, so from now on, we won't continue to build a hole, so to speak, in our structure. So that is one of the things that I wanted to share with you and I think is very important. My good friend and colleague, who is also ending his legislative career, at least in the House today, is Jase Bolger, the Speaker of the House, and I'm going to hand things off to him. Jase.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you. I would echo the appreciation of the opportunity to work together as the quadrant, including the governor. And I would say we probably all spent far more time than we planned to together in the last couple of weeks. I won't answer whether it was more than we wanted to in the last couple of weeks. It has been a good and constructive process. This spring, the House put forward the criteria that we wanted to fix our roads. We wanted to improve quality, we wanted to increase efficiency, and we wanted to add fairness through heavy trucks and through diesel parity. And we wanted to fix the roads long term. The Senate had very good ideas. This proposal achieves that. This proposal achieves those goals. We also have said for often that we wanted the taxes paid at the pump to go to fix the roads. This proposal does that. We also, at least in the House Republican side, said that we wanted to ramp up the funding. That if we put all the funding in at once, we would drive up inefficiencies and also create our own inflation. So the House Republican passed plan took 6 years to get to $1.2 billion for roads. The Senate and administration's plan took 4 years. This plan would take 3 years. This plan would take 3 years because we would dedicate $400 million in year one, $800 million in year two, and $1.2 billion or no restriction in year three. Obvious question becomes, what do we do with the balance? Because once the sales tax applies, this does all go into effect at once. What we would do is retire the transportation debt. We would pay down transportation debt because another problem from the 90s are today we're still paying the debt from the last time the legislature addressed roads. In fact, there's about $2.5 billion left in debt outstanding from that. And in fact, every year we have to pay $200 million towards that before we can put $1 towards fixing our potholes. So over those next 3 years, all dollars in excess of what I've just mentioned would go towards retiring that debt. I would add that this would pass in May, and the future legislature, the governor, the same governor, can pull forward $400 million to start construction the next construction season. With this passing, we will not miss another construction season. And as everybody has said, this doesn't happen easily. This doesn't happen without a lot of cooperation and compromise. And somebody I've enjoyed working closely together with has been the Democrat leader in the House, Tim Greimel.
Good afternoon. First, I want to thank the governor and the other legislative leaders for working so collaboratively and cooperatively to come up with this bipartisan solution. Taken as a whole, this is an excellent package that, as has been noted, offers the opportunity for voters to increase the sales tax rate in order to trigger a number of positive changes for our state. First and foremost, the ability to raise adequate revenue to fix our roads and other infrastructure. One of our caucus's greatest concerns was making sure that low to middle income folks, those who are struggling the most in today's difficult economic circumstances, were not hit with an additional tax burden that would make life even harder for them. And working cooperatively in a bipartisan way, we were able to include the Earned Income Tax Credit as part of this package. The Earned Income Tax Credit was reduced several years ago. This would restore it to where it was in 2010. It would make sure that our state Earned Income Tax Credit is back at 20% of the federal Earned Income Tax Credit level. And that's critically important, especially to make sure that those who work hard for low and moderate wages are protected from tax increases here. When one looks at the net tax effect for those low-income folks and middle-income folks who are working and who qualify for the earned income tax credit, if this ballot proposal passes, they will actually see a net decrease in their tax burden. The other very exciting component for our caucus is that if this ballot proposal passes, it will be a big win for schools and education in our state. As has been noted, it will increase funding to the school aid fund by $300 million per year, and it will provide a constitutional safeguard to make sure that the school aid fund is only used to fund pre-kindergarten through community college level education. And to talk more in detail on that point, I want to introduce my colleague, Senate Democratic Leader Gretchen Whitmer.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad to be here. I'm also kind of glad this is my last day in the legislature. Many people, you know, and yours too, buddy. Many people, you know, as we've had this debate for quite a while, would have said that the ideal fix would have had a legislative component with an alternative at the ballot for the people to weigh in on. And I was really proud that the Senate put together a bipartisan plan. But in this climate, that was not to be, and I am of the opinion that the worst thing we could do is to leave without doing anything. So I am really pleased on behalf of the Senate Democratic Caucus that we have got something that addresses the 4 principles that we've always said throughout this debate to which we were committed, and that is a real funding solution in perpetuity that protects schools and ensures that the schools are not jeopardized, but also that provides tax relief to people that are struggling the most in Michigan. And so the passage of this ballot initiative will accomplish all of those. There's a big if here, and that's if the ballot initiative passes. And I don't even want to think about if it doesn't. We all have a vested interest in making sure that this happens now. If it passes, I think the education protections go beyond protecting education, and that's something that excites me both as a policymaker, as someone who cares about the future of our state, but also as a mom with kids in our public schools. There'll be constitutional protection of the school aid fund from further raids and pressures. There will be an additional $300 million annually constitutionally protected, which accounts to about $200 per pupil, as the governor said. Frees up $200 million, and so therefore we're talking about $500 million of new and additional resources that are dedicated to the school aid fund for pre-K through 14, and it can be even in the form of scholarships for community college or vocational education, and that's something that I'm excited about as well. And tied to a more stable revenue source. Anyone who gassed up their car lately knows that it was a good experience, but it's one that we see schools fluctuating, and this is a much more solid and stable source of revenue. And so for these reasons, I think that this is something that merits our support and enthusiasm, and combined with the full restoration of the EITC, I'm glad to be a part of working toward getting this to become a reality. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank each one of the leaders. As a matter of personal privilege, I just want to say thank you to the fact we've had very interesting, intriguing, and exciting discussions over the last few days, but the work product that's coming out of this shows how people can work together to, again, look at those 5 principles and we check the boxes. And I also want to give a major shout out to the fact that 3 of these leaders, this is probably their last day, or hopefully their last day from their own words. And I want to thank Senator Richardville, Senator Whitmer, and Speaker Bolger for their hard work. And as a starting matter, I think this has been a good exercise for House Minority Leader Greimel to say we've been working together now for quite a few sessions, so we have a head start on quadrant meetings for next year. Looking forward to having some new members in that process. With that, though, let me open it up for questions.
Governor, if this ballot proposal goes down, what happens?
We have to start over again. And again, that's one of the challenges. Sometimes people find reasons. That shouldn't be a reason not to do this. This is about solving a problem. And if you look at many things that have taken place over the last few years, you have to have a courage and conviction to say there's a problem to be solved, let's go solve it.
Why did you compromise away your demand that there be a legislative fallback plan in case the people said no?
Yeah, well, the way I describe it is my original plan would have been to have something legislatively done with this as an option, much like a Proposal A. But that's part of the legislative process. It's about compromise. And compromise is not a dirty word. Too often it's viewed that way in politics. Compromise can actually make sure that you're working together, where everyone understands there needs to be some give, and I appreciate it. If I look through this group, I hope people found they got a lot more than they had to give up, and when you look at these principles, these are all outstanding policy principles. And I challenge people to say, if you looked at alternative solutions, see if you can run them through that analysis of those 5 principles, and you're going to have a challenge checking all those boxes, but for the solution.
Governor, I don't think most experts expect the low gas prices to continue, but if they do for an extended period, how much does that mess up this plan?
It doesn't, and that's one of the features that we put in this plan that was missing from the '97 plan. That again, low gas prices are good for our economy, and actually I think there's a reasonable opportunity to see low gas prices continuing, at least for the shorter term, the next couple of years. But this actually has something built in, so it has a range, a bandwidth on it that would go up with CPI.
Chris? Governor, what does this mean to the general fund if we're moving money out of the school aid fund for universities?
Yeah, if you look at, these are things that we can make work. What I would say is the general fund impact of most of these is not a large number. Actually, one of the things we had on one of the charts, we actually took it off, is we had the general fund impact, and it was about $5 million.
Why is it a better deal, if I'm doing, I hate doing math with you, because I always lose, but it looks like the total tax increase is about $1.75 billion. Why is that a better deal than just $1.3 billion?
I agree with the math. You're not deducting for the tax relief.
Well, 1.2 and 1.3 is 2.5, right? It takes
there is more net new money coming in. I mean, as a practical matter, but if you look at it, we're taking the retail sales tax off of fuels, and we're making a big difference in terms of the low-income tax relief because, again, those are the people that bear the major burden of the increased revenue stream. And so that's where we found common ground.
Governor, could you elaborate on the earlier comments about the $400 million and the $800 million? Do you prefer seeing this go retiring the debt rather than fixing the roads right away?
Well, I think the Speaker had a very thoughtful insight, and I appreciate him talking about that this is a case where we'll be ramping up in terms of a lot of construction projects. And in the meantime, we can use those resources to pay down debt that we've had that actually masked the size of our problem. If you looked at it, we did big bond issues back in the late or the early 2000 timeframe that sort of hid the problem of how bad our roads were and how inadequate funding we had. So let's pay that down because that frees up a revenue stream for ongoing road repairs, and the interest on that and payments are a couple $100 million a year. In addition, the Speaker mentioned that this has something to advance several $100 million for this construction season.
So what about all those drivers whose actions are rattling their tires as they want the money to go fix the roads?
Well, the main thing is this actually allows us to move $400 million at least for this next construction season. That's a great start. It's a big improvement over what we've been doing. Yeah.
Can I follow up just a little bit because I don't know that it's widely known. We already approved $285 million in this current fiscal year budget, so you have to add that 285 to the amount that he's talking about. And also in the last year, the last fiscal year, we spent about an extra $500 million, something like that, about $500 million. So we have taken steps out of the general fund to the tune of about $800 to $900 million. So you have to add that to the numbers that are ramping up.
Just to clarify, can you guys elaborate what is the overall net tax increase as part of this overall plan? And secondly, are you doing the sales tax or the income tax part of this?
I'm happy to try to walk through the numbers because it depends on economic activity. It depends on the gas price. But effectively what you're doing is shifting the taxes that are paid at the pump to fixing the roads. Separately, you have the 7% sales tax that is about $1.34 billion. And you have tax relief of about $260 million. So I'd subtract those two. Why do it this way? Because it's far more fair. It's far more efficient. It keeps us competitive. It checks all those boxes. You could not check those boxes without going to a 7% sales tax. You cannot go to a 7% sales tax without a vote of the people. That's why you end up that way. So those are the net numbers. And your other question was, does this Main Street? Yes.
Is that tied to the ballot proposal, or that would affect that either way?
It's not tied to the ballot proposal, but it's something else we would do.
Governor, with this being a non-election year, will there be help from the state to fund these elections, and how much will taking this to the voters cost?
Well, again, if you look at it, we'll have to analyze all that because quite often there are local elections going on. Again, May is not an unusual ballot time in terms of local elections. If you look at statewide elections, the cost of a statewide election typically is in the $10 million range.
Just to clarify, are you going to continue the general fund, I would say subsidy of roads that has paid for the matching funds the last two or three fiscal years, the federal match that has been short because of the revenue shortfall?
Well, go to Senator Richardville's comments. We've been in excess of that amount. We've actually dedicated more general fund, and we would be continuing that for the next couple of years. Longer term, you have an issue if this proposal goes, is that required? But we're going to make sure we do the federal match. Yeah.
First week in February, is your new budget going to include that match, or are you relying on the new revenue to make the match?
Yeah, again, well, February is when the new budget comes out, but again, we've devoted significant dollars to roads through general fund for the last few years. And so this needs to pass before you'd be making those assumptions.
Governor, you acknowledge that this could be a tough slog at the ballot box. Have you started to try to get commitments from the business community to help pay for a campaign to get this passed?
Well, not the business community, but the general public. Again, there's a lot of constituencies that hopefully can be supportive of this. This is something that is very helpful in terms of the business community. They've been talking about better roads for how long now? But if you look at, there's opportunities for the schools in terms of better things for schools, better things for our communities, better things in terms of tax relief for people. So I would hope this has broad-based support from a lot of groups.
Governor, I'd throw this open to anybody that wants to take it. There's been a lot of doubts that this would get done as recently as yesterday, I think. Can anybody sort of describe some of the drama that went on behind those closed doors, how you got to this point?
Look at our faces.
The bags under our eyes.
Yeah, I'll make a comment and see if anyone else wants to join, but what I'd say is, during this whole process, and we actually have had a lot of meetings, but coming out of each meeting, there was no animosity in these meetings. This was not about people violently disagreeing with one another. This was a very respectful civil process where people had different concerns and perspectives on important issues. And one of the reasons I was actually asked to do this is the whiteboard exercise by at least one of the members, the other one thought it was quite humorous, is that if you looked at it, this is how we...
faces give it away.
This is literally how we did it, where this whiteboard was brought into the room and we said, let's talk about what we need to achieve. And so it was a very collegial exercise, again, with people respectfully disagreeing with some strong opinions at times, but we worked through it and reconciled. So I'd be happy to see if somebody wants to add to that.
Sure.
Yeah, I would echo those comments. You know, obviously, in any matter as challenging and complicated as trying to check off 5 different and sometimes conflicting priorities and values, it's going to involve a lot of give and take, a lot of compromise, and very long discussions. But this was a collaborative process. I want to again thank the governor and my fellow legislative leaders for their hard work on this. And I think it's a great example of what can be accomplished for our state through bipartisan cooperation.
Can I add, Paul, you've doubted us before. 4 years ago, there was a lot of laughter from people in this room when we talked about getting the budget done by June. Wouldn't happen, you said. With determination, with cooperation, difficult things can be done.
Governor, we see which bills are part of this proposal. Did you make any point of views not to look at other bills, prevailing wage, electoral college, anything like that? Was there any?
Well, again, what I'd say is there's a number of supporting pieces to this, not in terms of those specific points, but there's a lot of follow-on bills that are part of this package that we didn't put on the board. But again, they're more ancillary supportive pieces of this. So what I would say is I think we've come to a good conclusion, but there's a lot of work to be done. And that's how I'd leave this today is this has been a great opportunity for leadership to work together, and the part you can see hopefully from this press conference is the leadership's together in supporting this proposal, strongly supporting this proposal. As a practical matter, there's a lot of work still to be done to get a 2/3 vote in both chambers and to pass a number of other bills, and that's one reason we're not going to keep going, because there are a lot of folk here that got a lot of hard work to do today in terms of getting this done, in addition to our citizens hopefully having a ballot proposal in May. So what I would say is, by no means have we solved the transportation issue and addressed all these principles. But now we have a solution. We have a solution that really takes into account key concerns in a very bipartisan, bicameral fashion to say we listened to everyone. Everyone had an opportunity to contribute to this list of 5. And we stopped because we thought we covered that list well. We have a solution that we support. So now it's up to all of us, and I hope you'll engage in this. Because to be open with you, I could see the initial reaction of some people saying, hey, this doesn't solve everything I wanted if you're interested in this area. But what I would say to you is that's what compromise is about. Don't dwell on the part you may not have gotten. Why don't we talk about the 80% plus that we're all achieving that has been critically important that we haven't been able to do, and traditionally doesn't happen in our state for years under tough questions like this. In '97, how many years did it take? About 8 or 9 years for that to get done. We have an opportunity to get something done and approved by the voters after a lot of hard legislative work today in May. That's a unique opportunity. Let's not let it go to waste. Let's make Michigan a better place. Thank you.